Hello, I'm Julian Whittle from Cumbria Chamber of Commerce, and I'm here with Lord Inglewood, the new chairman of Cumbria Local Enterprise Partnership, which we'll call Cumbria LEP for short. Lord Inglewood, LEPs was set up by the coalition government in 2011 to promote growth in the English regions. In part, they were a replacement for the old regional development agencies, which were abolished. They're supposed to be private sector-led, public-private partnerships, and to be a conduit for funding from government. Now, Cumbria LEP hasn't exactly covered itself in glory over the years. I mean, I think back to there was a business breakfast in Bowness in 2015 when the chair asked the audience whether Cumbria LEP was doing a good job, and not one of the 120 delegates who were there thought that it was doing a good job. So why do businesses have this poor perception of the LEP, and what can be done to improve it?
The perception of the LEP is something which is very difficult to gauge, but you tell me that of this meeting, and I don't in any way disagree. Clearly, things haven't gone as well in the past as people would have liked. I know a bit about that. I'm not familiar with all the detail, and I'm not actually interested in going back over the detail to sort of rake out personalities and point fingers. The reason its perception has not been very good is it's perceived not to have delivered.
Yeah. And
that's the key thing, is going forward from here and enabling it to deliver for Cumbria, all of Cumbria, in the future.
I see. So it's all about judging it on performance, I suppose.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think ultimately the buck stops with me.
Now, an independent panel was set up last year to review Cumbria LEP, found that it was ineffective and dominated by Cumbria County Council. And remember, we said they're supposed to be private sector led. Do you think that's fair comment? And if it is, how do you go about changing that culture?
In detail, I don't know whether the comment is fair or not, but we've clearly got to change the perception and make sure that it does actually deliver for everybody and is not an instrument, a tool for any particular part of Cumbria. It's for the county as a whole. And there are various reports been written and criticisms made, which we've now got to take account of seriously, with a view to remedying what has been identified as being wrong and taking it forward so that not only does it work well, but it's perceived to be run in the right way.
I see. Okay. So do you think the LEP does enough to engage with businesses? And when it does engage, does it pay enough attention to what they're saying?
I've only been chairman for about a couple of weeks, and I wouldn't wish to be emphatic about that. But I think there's two things. First of all, we've got to have good lines of communications with business. But remember, the LEP is not only about business. It may be private sector led, and it's to do with economic development. But it's also to do with everybody who lives in the county and their concerns and their priorities. And the second thing is important to remember that, I remember when I was chairing the Lake District Planning Board's Development Control Committee making this point, listening to people and agreeing with them isn't necessarily quite the same thing. We certainly must listen, but it's highly unlikely we will be able to agree with everybody. So some people are likely to disagree with us, there's nothing wrong in that, or be disappointed.
Okay, now 2 years ago, Cumbria LEP put in a bid for £165 million worth of growth deal funding from the government. It ended up getting 12.7 million, so only a tiny fraction of what it had asked for. Why do you think so much of the bid was rejected, and how does the LEP do better in future?
In detail, it's in the past, I don't know, but at the risk of stating the absolute obvious, it was clearly we'd put the wrong bids in. And if you're to get the money, not only have they got to be good bids from Cumbria's point of view, they've got to be good bids from the central government's point of view. And what we've got to aim to do is to develop an approach and a relationship and a strategy which combines the two.
And I suppose this raises a wider question, if you like, of whether the north of England gets its fair share of government funding. I mean, as an example, planned government expenditure on transport per head of population is over £4,000 in London, but only £855 in the northwest. Now that's a big imbalance. How do we redress that?
It certainly is a big imbalance, because one of the problems, particularly on transport projects, is that they carry out a form of cost-benefit analysis. And this is something, for example, when I was the MEP, I was very concerned about. Because we have a very small population, on all conventional cost-benefit analyses, we tend to be discriminated against because there just simply aren't the number of people to benefit. And therefore, you end up in a position where you're consistently, systemically likely to lose out on projects. Against that background, the Northern Powerhouse Initiative, which I must confess as an individual I wasn't entirely convinced by at the start, I think is a genuine attempt to revitalise the north of England. Although while we share some things with, say, Manchester, Leeds, Sheffield and Liverpool, we don't by any means share all of them. But I think that there is a refocusing of policy towards the north of England, which I recommend, and we've got to make sure that as part of the northern region, if you can put it that way, we use that to leverage some of the things we want that perhaps we might not have been able to get before.
Okay. Now, the LEP is drawing up a local industrial strategy for Cumbria. We at the Chamber were very heavily involved last year in the National Industrial Strategy. We consulted businesses and fed into the consultation on the Green Paper. So we know we're quite steeped in it. But the local industrial strategy, what's the purpose of that? And what do you hope it will achieve?
Well, it sits under the National Industrial Strategy, and the underlying rationale behind it is that those on the ground are best at identifying, within the framework of the national strategy, what is most appropriate and most likely to be successful for the locality in question. And so in developing this local industrial strategy, we've got to try and identify what I might call our strong points are, so that we avoid putting in bids that get turned down amongst everything else. And we've also got to try and see how we think, and in consultation with the people who live here, our economy most effectively developing in the years to come.
I mean, one of the big issues for Cumbria is the fact that, unlike the national workforce, which is growing, our working age population is shrinking, or is projected to shrink, as we've got so many people close to retirement.
That's right.
And that will be one of the challenges, I would imagine, that the local industrial strategy will have to
It's
meet.
got to build in that that phenomenon. Although, of course, if you're going to have a big garden village on the southern side of Carlisle and large proposals for housing development in places like Penrith, if all this comes to fruition, the one thing you've got to be absolutely clear about is people aren't going to come here if they can't find any work to do. So there is a push-me-pull-you relationship. And it doesn't always follow that, first, the population is going to go down consistently across the piece, and secondly, that is going to go on indefinitely.
Do you think the LEP has been sufficiently ambitious for Cumbria? I mean, we know that public funding is in short supply, but many of the schemes it has backed, I suppose you'd call them incremental, small-scale improvement, a road junction here, a roundabout there. Should it be looking at potentially transformational schemes? I'm thinking of projects like Northern Tidal Power Gateway's proposal for crossings of Morecambe Bay and the Duddon Estuary, which would combine tidal energy with a road, and that the road would obviously have a major impact on Barrow and Millen, providing shorter journey times to the M6. So should it be thinking big on that sort of scale?
I think there's always a danger that politicians, and we've seen a lot of it around the world recently, get very grandiose ideas into their heads. And that is fine if it is a sensible and good project, and if there's the money to pay for it. One of my concerns currently is that we seem to be in a state in the country where our national revenues are under very great pressure. And therefore, I don't think one should necessarily, as it were, put it this way, despise the incremental schemes. Because if there isn't a good major scheme, then the incremental scheme is probably the best you can get. And the more I think about it, if you look, for example, at the way in which the A66 road is being improved, the new dualling and the proposals for further dualling, each one is a smallish element. Taken together, they're going to make a very big difference.
Now, as a former MEP, under the old system when MEPs actually had constituencies and you were the MEP for Cumbria. But as a former MEP, I suspect you have more than a passing interest in the Brexit negotiations which are going on. But I wonder, what particular challenges does Brexit bring for Cumbria, and how can the LEP help to meet those?
Well, the first thing I think we need to be absolutely clear about, as of today, and speaking today, we really don't know what the Brexit outcome is going to be. And that makes it impossible to provide any detailed commentary. What I think is almost inevitable is that the whole agricultural rural policy of this country will undergo a significant change. And that provides challenges and opportunities. I must say, I'm not, from an agricultural rural tourism perspective, I'm glad I'm not representing East Anglia. I think Cumbria's place in what I call the pecking order is going to go up rather than down. But having said that, whether there's going to be enough money to go round remains to be seen, despite the protestations of what we hear from central government. So I think there is potential for there a kind of change from which we may be able to reap benefits, although things can go terribly wrong too. Let's overlook that. And in that, I think the LEP has got to, and it's early days, and it's also completely novel. The LEP is going to have to help forge a common vision for the countryside and tourism and agriculture in our area. I mean, we're very well placed to the extent that we've got 2 World Heritage Sites, huge number of important designated landscapes, and an important agricultural industry in the livestock sector. And there is, I think, a relationship between all those bits that can be put together, which will mean that we will be better placed than very many parts of England.
Now, work is progressing on a Borderlands Growth Deal. Now, that's a growth deal that would straddle the England-Scotland border. Cumbria would be part of it, Northumberland would be, and on the Scottish side, Dumfries and Galloway and the borders. Do you see the LEP as having a role in that, and if so, what?
Well, I'll start by saying I think that to have an approach that includes southern Scotland and Northumbria and Cumberland, particularly North Cumberland, if I can use the old-fashioned word, is good and something I welcome. I mean, after all, Carlisle is the border city. Exactly how the mechanics of this will work, I think, are not entirely clear yet. I've certainly made it clear from a personal point of view, I'm in favour strongly of working with Borderlands organisation in harmony with them, so that we can mutually work together to our collective benefit. And it, on the face of it, seems a new way of looking at things, but come on, let's grasp the nettle and make a go of it.
I mean, part of what a growth deal would mean is more devolved spending. Some of that could come through the LEP, do you think?
Let's see. I mean, at the end of the day, the purpose of the LEP is to promote the well-being of this county. And if a scheme evolves, which means other people are bringing money into it, I'm not against that per se. What we want to do is to ensure that there is a kind of coherence right across the piece, so that both you don't waste money, and B, you don't do the wrong thing.
Okay. What do you see as the future for LEPs? I mean, how do you see them evolving?
Well, as a new chairman of roughly a fortnight's duration, I'm still very much a novice here. There is talk, and has been talk, that LEPs might be abolished. People in higher places than I'm in have told me that's not likely to be the case. If anything, I think they may become more important. I went on about day 3 to a meeting in number 10 Downing Street, where I hadn't been for some time, with the Prime Minister, where the LEP chairs were talking to her, and all the evidence I see is that they think the LEP's going to become more important rather than less important as instruments of economic growth.
Yeah, because when they first started, I mean, one of the complaints is that they didn't have any funding at all and couldn't do anything, and that has gradually changed as money's come down.
Yes.
So that could actually, that role could be enhanced possibly.
I think so. I mean, government always wants to do things on the cheap. And one of the things that is true, whatever you're doing, in order to do things properly, it's going to require resources and so on. And exactly how this is going to figure between the public sector and the private sector, particularly if their role is to evolve, is something that isn't clear yet. But as long as one's reasonably clear about what you're trying to do and how you relate to other people, then you're in a position to try constructively to take things forward.
Okay. Thanks very much, Lord Inglewood, and all the best from everyone at Cumbria Chamber of Commerce in your new role.
Thank you very much.